Six consultation from Scottish Ministry regarding an application made under section 36 of the Electricity Act 1989. For the installation and operation of wind farms, and we've read the list, I don't read that out. The report will be given to us by Christoph, the Principal Planning Officer. I don't know if Mark wants to say anything about section 35, training, receive no obligation. Good, all right. John, over to you.
So actually there was something I know it's been said for the event, and once again there's been some discussion about lobbying, right, and declaring that. And I just want to again make a declaration, but I don't feel it's supposed to be discussing this application. The bottom line is I was approached and I met on the 4th of September last year with Iranian Boyle, described himself as a planning consultant. The application was just getting submitted, and they wanted advice in terms of whether there was any issues that the council would be concerned about. I said I can't speak for the council, and also as a member of the planning committee, and I couldn't make any formal indication of how I felt about the application until I had all the information. But I did feel it would be churlish not to be given my almost promise and a formal chief of the planner, and I couldn't give advice in terms of how the previous wind farm applications had been handled. And I highlighted then that I'd attended the planning consultation, which was held in Alva, and that the criteria that I'd laid down at that time, and which had been the framework of previous wind farm applications, one of the principles was certainly establishment should not be breached, and that where possible, if a developer's going ahead, it should take account of recreational improvements in that aspects of the locals. That's as far as our meeting actually went. It belonged to discussions about housing and other matters that involve relationship to the wind farm. He described himself as a former Labour councillor, and therefore I was quite interested in his views on different issues which didn't touch upon the wind farm. As a consequence of that, I do feel I wasn't compromised. I don't feel that there was actually that was strong lobbying. The approach was very much in trying to get views now of previous applications that have been handled, and I did my best to address that. So that's all. Also, and I also informed the planning officers that I had that conversation, and since then, the issue of lobbying has come onto the floor in terms of must recent approach, you understand.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. It seems to me that on the face of it, you made the gentleman, you told him you couldn't give him advice, and you didn't give him advice. Yes. Substitution Kyo.
Just hold over the questions. Then Steve talks and starts talking about the stairs talk to him. If you want to speak with hospital, so
That's fine. I think there's been transparency here, and I don't think we've got an issue.
Not a decision for me.
No,
Decision for Councillor Bansley, and he's declared his interest.
Yeah, that's fine. Let's just proceed. John, thank you. Councillor Law. Professor.
It appeared I received an email from him. I didn't know it was from there was a document. I didn't open it because I don't open documents that I don't know the recipient, and I don't know who, so if you was anything compromised, but I just think it's important to share that those emails they were sent friends. I have no clue what percentage deleted.
Yeah, I mean, but okay, sent for a whole doing it. I got one as well. But I looked at it, I skimmed it and put it to one side. In fact, I ended up giving it to Clark yesterday. Councillor McTaggart, we're all coming to church today.
Well, I better say that I've also got it. I did read it. And then it just confused me. I thought, what is this? And then disregarded it. So I didn't respond.
Thank you. It's not an issue. No more confessions. Good. John, are you sure? Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
as far as I know, this is the first Section 36 consultation which the council has had, let alone come to. So it's a consultation by Scottish ministers via the Energy Consent Unit, and not only Clack Manager Council, but also Perth and Kinross Council are a statutory consultee in this regard. So it's not the role of either council to approve or refuse the application. The role of the committee today is to consider a recommendation made by the planning officers, which is that the council should raise an objection. Your alternative, should you not agree with the recommendation, is to not raise an objection. So, just before we go on to the slides, just to say this is a 13 turbine wind farm. The tip height of the proposed turbines is 149.9 metres, which means when the tip is at the top of its rotation. The proposed lifespan of the development is 40 years, after which it will be decommissioned and the site will be restored. That tends to be how these applications and how wind farms come forward. And to some extent, it represents an extension to the existing wind farm development at Burnfoot, Hill and Rodders, which are our operational wind farms. And I'd ask you to note that 8 of the turbines will be Clack Manager, 5 of them in Perth and Kinross, and you'll see that when we go through the slides. Other development components come with wind farms, not just the turbines, such as substation compounds, substation infrastructure, in this case battery storage, access tracks, and the likes of that. But the main block where these works is well away from the county boundary, well into Perth and Kinross, and not visible from Clack Manager. Okay. Okay, the first slide, and hopefully we'll come to it in a minute. I've got a couple of gremlins here. This one. I just want you to note the position of the wind farm in relation to the A9, which is to the north of the wind farm, and the A91, which is to the south, which you can see there is the road going through Tillicoultry, Alva, Main Street. And also just to note on this slide, given the red line, that the access comes in from the A9 from Perth and Kinross. On the next slide. On this slide, I asked you to note the boundary between Clack Manager and Perth and Kinross, which is the dotted line in the middle highlighted. And also just the general location of existing wind farms. You can pick up outside of the red line site, just to the east, you can see there the general location of the Rodders and Burnfoot Hill wind farms, which are operational. Moving on to the site layout plan. At the bottom there, T1 is the southern rotor turbine. 8 turbines are in Clack Manager, along with a proposed borrow pit, which I'll zoom in on a bit later in the presentation. And you've got a couple of temporary construction compounds, which you can see there in pink. And as I mentioned, the substation, the battery storage, and other infrastructure are proposed in Perth and Kinross, which is off the top of this slide. The next slide is a design evolution plan slide. So if you go top left first, the initial proposal by the applicants was to site a number of turbines just in Clack Manager with a tip height of 180 metres. If you then go top right, you can see that the idea has extended into Perth and Kinross with more turbines, but with a reduced tip height to 149.9 metres. And then bottom left, it's starting to develop. But again, turbines resting at 149.9 metres, and bottom right, that is the design freeze, if you like, which is where the developers decide this is what we're going to submit. And this has been through scoping. So the scoping process, as you may know, is where the applicants have the idea of making a building development, and in this case, go through Scottish ministers to find out when they submit an application with an environmental impact assessment, what must go into that environmental impact assessment. So the initial schemes were through scoping, and the bottom right is what was submitted. And to note that just prior to making the application, the number of turbines was reduced to 13 from 14. And I think at this point, I would ask you to note that turbines with a tip height of less than 150 metres, hence 149.9, don't require visible aviation lighting, which is normally required for safety purposes by the Civil Aviation Authority. And in planning terms, the introduction of aviation lighting can be quite a significant issue in its own right. So we're not looking at that today, and we can assume that that has been one of the reasons the applicant has made the choice to go for 149.9 for tip. I've got a few complicated slides, and I'm going to try to explain them without confusing myself, let alone anybody else. So this next map is a topographical map, and really, again, just to first look at it, I know you sort of think, well, what's going on here? But the brown areas you can see are the steepest, and the green areas are the least sloping. And in between them, there's yellow, which is the ones, the transitional areas. So turbines are naturally kept away from the steepest areas, principally for technical reasons. It's very difficult to build them there. There are many construction companies trying to put a turbine on a steep slope. The next slide is the zone of theoretical visibility slide, and these are difficult to sort of comprehend, even for the likes of us who are dealing with them on a regular basis. But I'll try and simplify it for you. The significance of the colours there on the map, and I might stand up and do a bit of pointing if need be. So this is theoretically how many hubs you would see from various locations in and around the site. The pink areas are where you would theoretically see 11 to 19 hubs, and of course that's mainly very close to the site. Orange areas are where you would theoretically see 8 to 10 hubs of the turbines. Yellow areas are where you would potentially see 4 to 7, and then green are where you would be down to potentially seeing 1 to 3 hubs. And that means, of course, the wind farm will be less visible from those areas which are green. And if you look everywhere else, in theory, you're not going to see any of the hubs of the wind turbines. There's also one of these 4 tips, but not to confuse the issue. It's probably most important just to recognise that this is an indication of really where you're likely to see them from, and that's reflected in some of the viewpoints. So we're going to be looking at viewpoints 1, 2, 5, 8, and 9. They're the only ones which are actually in Clackmannanshire. All the rest of the viewpoints are in other authority areas. The next slide shows you landscape character in Clackmannanshire. And the proposed development is limited to the Oakhill Hills. It's divided up into 2 sub-areas, and the main block being the Southern Scarp, which is where you can see all your the profile of the hills, in particular looking from the karstlands, and then beyond that you've got the Western Peaks. There are only 2 turbines in the Southern Scarp area, which is T1 and T2. The remainder are in the Western Peaks, but inevitably, because of there is a join between the 2, you don't see some of the turbines in one and not the other. There is an overlap there of the visibility. Okay. The next slide shows you designated landscapes. So in Clackmannanshire, the development is within the Oakhills Special Landscape Area. Now, it's a local designation, but it extends into the region due to the indivisibility between other authority areas, including Falkirk, Stirling, Fife, and Perth and Kinross. But essentially, it's a designation that we make for Clackmannanshire benefit. Just over the border there, you've got the equivalent in Perth and Kinross, which has got a slightly different name. That's the local landscape area, the LLA. Ours is a special landscape area. In the planning report, there is commentary regarding what the special qualities are of the special landscape area. if need be at some stage, I can pick up on them and read them out. But I feel for the time being, just to know that it's a local landscape designation. The next slide is going to show you other wind farms which are nearby. I've already mentioned Burnfoot Hill, Rodders, Burnfoot Hill East. That's the cluster which is immediately adjacent to the proposed site, and to which, to a certain extent, this is an extension. A bit further to the northeast or east-northeast there, you've got Greenknowes, which is operational. All the blue sites are operational. And you've also got some gold dots you can see to the right of Burnfoot Hill. That's quite important. That's Brunt Hill and Craig Head. At the time of submission, my understanding is that they were both not, they hadn't had a decision. But at this time, my understanding is that Craig Head has now been consented on appeal. And that Brunt Hill, the council has recommended to the Scottish officers that they do not object to Brunt Hill. And both of these schemes include turbines of up to 200 metres to tip height. So you're dealing with a different thing there anyway. These ones which would come with aviation lighting. Okay, on the next slide, it's not that easy to see what's going on in it, but it indicates the tourism and recreation receptors in and around Clackmannanshire. You can see the site there in the middle in red. The one thing I wanted to point out to you, which hopefully you can see, is just to the right of the site, you can see a line which wiggles from Tillicoultry up to Blackford. That's a core path and a right of way. Within the application site, although I think we're all aware there are plenty of permissive paths and a network of recreational routes, none of those are designated as rights of way or core paths. They're permissive and established a network of permissive pathways. So the next one relates to that as part of the benefits, which I will at some stage later in the presentation wrap up for you, so you know what they all are in a particular bit. This one points out a particular one which is most easily understood on a map. The green dotted path that comes up from the east end of Alva is an existing, well-used, permissive right of way, and it cuts up between Craighorn and Ben Evell, which are two of the summits, and it kind of peters out just north of there. And so the idea is to link it in to the path network, which would be created by building the tracks to serve the wind farm. So it's that sort of hook at the top of the green dotted line. So that's one of the benefits that's offered as part of this, is to improve the recreational path network. Sorry. I'm moving on to abnormal loads routes. As you know, you'll have noticed that our roads and transportation colleagues have left. That's because from their point of view, there is nothing to point out about because quite often with wind farms, you get abnormal loads. You will have on this development if it goes ahead, and then you get construction traffic. All of it's coming in by the blue route, which basically goes right around Clackmannanshire and comes in at the top through the A9 in Perth and Kinross. And I'll just show you a slightly more detailed map, just so you can get an idea of where the settlements are. You know, we're coming in down at Forsyth through Dunfermline and then up around the top. So as you can see, that's not touching Clackmannanshire at all. So the consultee didn't have any comments to make about that. The next slide is going to look at, it gives you an idea about cumulative noise. So that's noise from existing wind farms and the proposed wind farm. The reason this is important is because it is an issue that quite often comes up in when you're considering proposed wind farms. And actually, I have done a section on it in the report. But the bottom line is the green dotted line that goes around all of the wind farms identifies the extent where anything beyond that will automatically be acceptable in terms of the noise that is generated by the wind turbine, less than 35 decibels. So it's just really to highlight that noise is not an issue for us today. That is set out in the report. Now moving on to the components of the wind farm, the first one inevitably being the turbine. So 149.9 metres to the tip above ground level, that's when it's rotating. The height is around 80 metres, so just above halfway up. Now, the hub heights are represented, but they're not committed to generally in these drawings, because at the point of getting the contract together, you can't be certain that the hubs will remain at the same site, at the same height. What will normally happen is that the final turbine will be decided via condition, which that, if consented by Scottish ministers, will come back to us, and then we can assess whether the turbine that they're proposing when they're going to contract is the same that we've assessed in the application. But it's a standard 3-bladed turbine, and all the turbines go around in the same direction. And again, just to reiterate, they will have no visible aviation lighting on them, potentially infrared, as required by the Civil Aviation Authority. This is an indicative typical turbine foundation, and it's a lot to look at, but you've got the bird's eye view at the top and then a cross section at the bottom. The most important things to note are that there's a diameter of 22.4 meters, a depth of 3 meters, and the area of concrete used to make the foundation would be 519 cubic meters. The central, looking at the top, the bird's eye view, that central circle is the 6 meters where the turbine will be sited on top of the foundations. The next one relates to track construction. Tracks are generally up to 6 meters in width, and they're adapted to take account of underlying ground conditions, including areas of heat, which tend to be avoided, or where they're crossed, they involve floating tracks supported by geoloads, which spread the surface and the loads, reducing compaction. You've got various different kinds of tracks there, but generally they're 6 meters in width, and they're adapted to suit the ground conditions. The next one's a bit tricky to look at, but that's a bird's eye view. That's a crane hard standing, and there's more to it when the development is built out. But that's what remains afterwards. These are the indicative sort of permanent elements of the crane hard standing used to put up the turbines while the development is in situ. So you've got storage trestles, boom assembly ports, and you've got tower storage areas and areas where the crane and auxiliary crane will stand. So that's just the functional area in and around the turbine, mainly for construction, but also for maintenance, inevitably. And I mentioned that the substation compound was well away from the Clackmannanshire boundary in Perth and Kinross. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like, it is 75 metres by 100 metres generally. Got the control building in the middle, you've got the substation and transformers, and in this case, a proposed battery storage facility within the compound. There's not much more detail on that. And I mentioned borrow pits. The borrow pit is an area where the developer will excavate rock to make tracks that will subsequently be processed on site, sometimes using blasting and sorting and so on. And there's one proposed in Clackmannanshire theoretically, and the next slide kind of shows what it looks like. It's you can see the cross section at the bottom. It's a pit, and within there will be an analysis of what rock is available, and they will excavate what they need to help with construction. And just on the top there, it's just a bird's eye view. You have an access ramp which goes into the pit, and afterwards that's restored. Of course, the profile changes because you no longer have the rock in the pit. So I'm moving on to viewpoints now. And hopefully you'll be able to see what I need you to see in these. Starting off with the first viewpoint, which has been selected by the applicant to demonstrate what the wind farm could look like. And the first one is Ben Kloof. It's the highest point within the Ochils in Clackmannanshire, and it's looking generally northwest towards the nearest turbine, which are just under 2 kilometres away, that being T1. Okay. I'm just going to try and explain what you can see in the slides here. The top one is as it looks at the moment from Ben Kloof. In the far distance, you can see the Southern Highlands. Just to the right, you can see existing wind turbines, which are white. And if you drop down to the bottom half of this, those are repeated in blue. So that's the existing turbines either at Rodders or Burnfoot Hill. And then in the foreground, the red turbines are wireline representations of the turbines which would be implemented for the Windburn wind farm, what you're looking at today. Further off there, you've got, you can just see behind and in front of the submarines another wind farm in the distance. It's a Braes of Doon wind farm, and that is an operational wind farm. Just please know, I'm not going through all the viewpoints today, just want the plat manager known file of those. So please do bear with me. This is what you see when you turn away, if you turn 90 degrees clockwise away from on the viewpoint at Bedford. There you're just looking at existing wind farms belonging to Rodders and to Burnford Hill. And the next ones, these are helpful because they're zoomed in, and also because then you've got the turbine superimposed onto the, so it's a photo montage. So on the top, you can see the wire line. On the bottom, theoretically, that's what you will be seeing from the top of Bedcliffe. And again, turning to the right, the ones on the far right, at the bottom half of the screen are existing. All the ones, again, they correspond to the red turbines in the wireline drawing. They're the ones which will be introduced. Next viewpoint is at the Nevitt, and this is also looking more northwest. And you tend to approach the summit of the Nevitt from the south. You're coming up from Alva through the glen, and there are no turbines currently visible from this viewpoint. The nearest turbine would be approximately 2.24 kilometres from here. And when you look at this slide, when you're on the Nevitt, the hills you're looking at are Craighorn on the left and Ben Ever on the right. And you're looking broad north from here. And as you can see from the wireline drawing at the bottom, when the turbines are operational, you'll be seeing the sweeping blades of 4 of them behind Craighorn. And as I say, there are no turbines visible here at the moment. And here you can see a slightly zoomed in version of that. Just, I hope you can pick up. It's a very good photograph, and you can just about pick out what you would see from a Nevitt looking through Craighorn. The next one I'm moving on to is not in the locals. We're down here now on the B9140 in Collyland. So this has been chosen, it's the road connecting Fishcroft and Coles Norton to Glenogle Village and Tolcon. The nearest turbine is going to be 5.5 kilometres away from here. 1 turbine hub and rotating blades of 3 turbines will be visible. And this viewpoint tends to represent an area around the middle of Clackmannanshire, which is partly rural and partly settled. The viewpoint itself is not a significant place, but it is an opportunity to understand the visibility of the development as people move through the middle of the county. So, onto the visualisations. And for these ones, I think because of the distance, not that easy to pick them up in the photo montages, but top half of this is the view as is. Bottom half is a wireline diagram showing, you can see the hub of at least 1 turbine and the blades of 2 others from this general part of Clackmannanshire. And the next one is a slightly zoomed in version of that, which should make it a little bit clearer. Unfortunately, and I think I realised this before we've done the presentation, you can't really pick them up in the photo montage, but I can tell you that they are there, and holding them if you can see them, whether it's worth just pointing to them. Would you mind just pointing on the bottom of the slide, on the bottom half of the slide, where because it's not easy to see them from here.
I can't see them.
Okay. So in the middle, where it drops down, that's where you've got visibility.
Okay, so you've got better eyesight than me.
Thanks for that. I knew that would be an issue, so apologies for that. But you can only really work with what you've got. So the next is I've got 2 more of these viewpoints, and then a couple of sub viewpoints. We'll need to zoom out again if you wouldn't mind. Whoever's zoom that one in.
Molly, can you touch the screen again? Thank you.
That's lovely, thank you.
Magic.
So the top of Alloa Tower provides a great viewing platform northwards across the Settled Castlands and Clackamas towards the Ochils. And from here, the nearest turbine will be 8.3 kilometres away, with 3 hubs and a blade of 6 turbines altogether rotating. As you can see, the scene is very heavily foregrounded by buildings and vegetation in the Castlands, with the scarp skyline of the Ochils backclothing it. To achieve this, you do have to go to the top of the tower. On the ground below, the buildings and vegetation screen the Ochils to a great extent. But I think it's one of the ways you can appreciate the juxtaposition between what's in the foreground and then the Ochils beyond. And with me, just a slightly zoomed in version, so you can see there how the turbines are visible above the scarp skyline. And the last one I've got for you, the main view, which is Clackmannan Tower. This is different. This is taken from the base because we don't tend to go to the top of Clackmannan Tower at the moment. It looks north-northwest towards the development, a little over 9 kilometres from the nearest turbine, which is again T1. 2 turbine hubs, and the rotating blades of 4 of the turbines will be observed from here. And I'd like to point out that from viewpoints 8 and 9, there are no other turbines currently visible above the skyline of the Ochils. And again, I've just got a zoomed in version of that. Perhaps most important, just to look at the profile of it, which is easy to see in both of those parts of the slide, and just see how the turbines are there, proud of that upper scarp skyline. I've got 2 more. This is the view from Ben Ever. I don't have photo montages for this one, but as you're walking from Alva through the Nebbit up to Ben Clwch, you'll tend to go through Ben Ever, and this is the view from there. So you've got 13 turbines visible, 12 of them prominent, and generally visible to full height. But from here, you've got no turbines visible from the Rodders or Burnfoot wind farms, and the nearest turbine from here is 1.3 kilometres away. And the last one I've got for you is from Socky, which is a little under 7 kilometres to the nearest turbine. And this more represents occasional views that you'll get from the settlements of Socky and Alloa in particular. As you come and go through buildings and trees, views of the Ochils, as we know, will come into view. So you'll get significant glimpses, but you're not going to be looking at this all the time. And that's the disbenefit of having a wireline. That's the theoretical visibility, but clearly a lot of the time here you'll have portions of vegetation in front of you. So just thinking about the planning report, thinking about the planning reports, the committee will be aware that the recommendation to object indicates that despite benefits, the Windburn wind farm will generate, officers are minded to object because the adverse landscape and visual impact of the development would be so adverse that they render the scheme unacceptable in the overall planning balance. Okay, the UK is in the middle of a global climate emergency. Scottish planning policy recognises the importance of renewable energy schemes being implemented to help meet net zero targets by 2045. The proposed Windburn wind farm will make a modest but significant contribution towards that target. In terms of the benefits arising from this, which are material considerations to the application, I'll just read you a few things. So, in terms of the electricity generated, it's anticipated that 65 megawatts of power will be generated by the 13 turbines, enough to supply power for around 70,000 average UK households. Compared to fossil fuel mixed energy schemes, it's estimated that the development could result in a carbon saving of nearly 100,000 tonnes of CO2 every year. And it's estimated that the carbon payback period for the development could be as little as 1.3 years. Just to explain, you're obviously going to have impacts and the creation of carbon dioxide when you're excavating materials to build the turbines and during construction, but that will be paid back within 1.3 years according to the application, although we can't verify that as planning officers. Further benefits of the scheme are that to offset impacts on the blanket bog habitat within the site, 251 hectares of blanket bog will be actively restored, and a further 361 hectares restored through grazing management over the lifetime of development. And all of this will take place in the development in the application site. And 14.43 hectares of native riparian woodland planting is proposed as part of an outline habitat management plan. In terms of socio-economic benefits, an estimated £28.5 million expenditure will be there during the construction phase, approximately 4.7 million of which will be spent in the local area, which is Clackmannanshire, both from Kinross and Stirling for the purpose of this case, in terms of that local economy, and then 11.8 million in Scotland as a whole. And then during the 24-month construction phase, the proposed development is expected to support in gross terms 68 full-time employment roles benefiting local people. Nationally, for Scotland as a whole, both will be expected to support 166 person years of employment. And during the operational phase, once it's built up and running, the proposed development is expected to require between 3 and 5 new full-time employees, for example, engineers and technicians, locally, and further those created throughout supply chain effects elsewhere in Scotland. And the other benefit, which you saw earlier, is the proposal to extend the informal permissive path, as shown in the presentation, to connect into the network of site traffic. So, to sort of bring things to a conclusion, I'd remind the committee that we are one of 2 councils involved in this process. Perth and Kinross hasn't resolved their position yet, hasn't taken it to committee, and hasn't indicated their position in any sort of planning reports. Other than landscape and visual impacts, in terms of the topics that Clackmannanshire Council is in a position to consider, the recommendation is, well, it boils down to adverse landscape and visual impacts, which were found to be unacceptable on Clackmannanshire. And I'd like to sort of explain, this is set out in detail in the report, that the objection relates not only to the adverse visual impacts on the overalls that you would see from Clackmannanshire settlements and from the karstlands, but also to adverse impacts will be experienced from the overalls themselves, from within the special landscape area, and from the network of recreational paths within it. The importance of the overalls in a local sense can't be overstated. The contrast between the hills and the lowlands creates a setting that characterises the county and is part of its identity. The characterful and dramatic skyline is unbroken by infrastructure. Regionally, the overalls are important not only because of their appearance and scenic landscape qualities, but also as a well-used recreational resource, generally not characterised by wind turbines. Stated reasons to object reflect the impacts locally and within the overall areas. I'd ask you to note again, none of the existing turbines are visible above the skylines, no hubs, no towers, no rotating turbine blades. They're contained by topography. They're smaller and they're further away from the sensitive scar area. So topography is doing its job in containing their visual impacts. And the committee will be aware that recommendation by officers is informed by an independent assessment undertaken by Ironside Farrar as a landscape consultancy. And the assessment identifies fundamental issues with the scheme as submitted and describes possible mitigation to reduce landscape and visual impacts, involving the removal of up to 6 of the 13 turbines, which will leave only 2 turbines in Clackmannanshire. To date, the applicant has not submitted any alternative proposals to Scottish ministers, meaning that all statutory consultees, including the councils, must consider the scheme on the basis of the current proposals. And I will remind the committee that representations from the public, interest groups and community councils fall to be considered by Scottish ministers through the Energy Consent Unit and not the council. So just on the summary slide, I'll just read it out to you. We are recommending that the committee accepts the officer's recommendation to object to the proposals as submitted. The objection relates to unacceptable landscape and visual impacts for Clack Manager based on professional external landscape consultancy advice. And to note that the objection by the local planning authority, be it one or both of them, as a statutory consultee, would trigger a public local inquiry. And I just wanted to add that or finish off with to say that the recommendation recognises that landscape and visual impacts are only one matter for consideration, and the development plan requires impacts to be considered in the overall plan balance, in particular regards to the climate emergency. In this case, however, the severity of the landscape and visual impact in the climate management context are such that the scheme as submitted should promote an objection. Position of the planning service in this is clear. This is not an unbalanced recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Looking to questions. Councillor McTaggart.
Thanks for that, John. You spoke about the main access route being on the Ross side. Will there be any access routes on the Clack Manager side for potential future maintenance, whatever? Once this, if this goes up. I'm just wondering about any further impact from the locals in the future should this be agreed.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I can answer that. Nothing is proposed to come through Clack Manager, and if they did, my suspicion is that there would be a separate planning commission of some sort, whether that be as part of a consultation with Scottish ministers or through us. But that is not the intention at the moment. Everything's coming through Perth and Kinross.
Thanks, John. Next year.
John, the being a special landscape area, which is a local description, but what power does that have?
Well, it's not a national designation. It's a designation that is created locally and recognised in a sort of broader picture of landscape character areas. From our point of view, it informs our supplementary guidance. Our supplementary guidance on onshore wind farm development is detailed, and there are lots of descriptions of the character. So having a special landscape area, recognising its local significance, but it doesn't just stop there because it's not contained. It's a piece of landscape. You can see it from lots of other places. I guess if you're in the middle of a very large authority area like the Highlands, you might have a landscape area which is only really of significance in terms of that authority. But here in Clack Manager, although it's our local designation, and of course you've got the one just over the boundary, which is the local landscape area for Perth and Kinross, they stretch further afield, they're intervisible. So it's recognition that that landscape area is special enough to give it a designation and then talk about it in detail, identify what its special qualities are, set that out in documents and then adopt that as supplementary guidance. We don't just have one special landscape area in Manager, we have another one as well. We have the forest special landscape area, which is Gartwall Dam, and that is another one which is recognised by its special qualities. So it is an opportunity to do that. And in terms of weight, it is a local designation. It's not a national designation. So we have to be mindful of that. But it's still very, very important in a local sense. And its qualities extend legally.
I mean, does it confer us some help and assistance if it goes to the inquiry? I mean, does it carry weight when the ministers are looking at this case? Will they say, oh, that's a special bit? No, we need to think about that, or they just disregard it because it's not national?
It's a material consideration, and it's part of the whole overall consideration that we take into account. But I think what you're perhaps alluding to is it a line in the sand, or is it a showstopper? No, it isn't.
Okay, it's clear that. Yeah. It's a difficult one, it's very difficult, because the intrusions on the skyline, I suppose, there's an absolute sense to any intrusion is bad. But, you know, if you're accepting intrusion as a tiny one, okay, but a big one is not. So, and if we allow a tiny one, what's the risk that this would propagate across the whole skyline in, the next 10, 20 years?
I'm sorry, is that a question? Because if it's not, I don't think I can really answer it. I think it's more
speculative. What's the risk of it spreading?
That does come through in the recommended reasons for objection. If you have a special landscape area, if you allow a wind farm within it, in certain cases, you are then enabling the special qualities to erode. And as they erode, it desensitizes the special landscape area, and that could open the door for additional developments. I mean, I have dealt with a lot of wind farms in other authorities, and how they tend to work is that when the principle is established, and you can see that in the Burnfoot and Rogers cases, you get a core, and then they'll seek to extend them. It's normal, and that can be, you can have a whole wind farm, and that can be extended, and then you'll get another one next to it. This is clustering, and it's the normal way of things with wind farms. We are suggesting that it is something to consider if you don't object to this wind farm. You could be desensitizing that area, and it could then be more open to additional development.
Is that material consideration?
Yes.
Okay.
It's the desensitization of this special landscape area that is an impact of the wind farm.
Right. Any other questions?
Absolutely. Sean, I'd a lot of difficulty unpicking the unassigned Farah appraisal. In terms of views from the cars, and in particular the photomontage image from Gatmore Dam, for instance, which I consider to be in the cars, rather than elevated positions from Clackmannan and Alloy Tower. But from the cars, am I right in saying there's still 4 or 5 prominent wind turbines in that, and unfair assessment?
I've got the landscape and visual impact assessment, the report from Ironside Farah here, but I'm a bit nervous that if I come off this presentation, I'm gonna lose it. You'll have seen in that document that the Ironside Farah have opted to look at Gartmore Dam off their own back. We didn't prompt them to do that. They've looked at it as another location where there is perhaps sensitivity to wind farm development, and you've got intervisibility there from the 2 special landscape areas. But yes, there would be visibility of the wind farms from Gartmore Dam in a similar way, I think, that you've seen from facing Clackmannan Tower. So, in addition to the one we've seen today, although that's not a representative viewpoint, it is something that the Ironside Farah have chosen to look at. You would have visibility of a number of turbines from there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to make this statement, then I'm trying to turn that
Thank you.
question, but one of the fundamental principles that, as I said earlier, and how we handled the previous wind farm applications was not to breach the southerly escarpment. And that was generally from karst locations like Clackmannanshire Bridge, not sitting at the top of Alloy Tower or Clackmannan Tower. It's my personal view is that as soon as you go up Ben Clwch, Ben Eder, you're looking for panoramic views. So the visual is a different issue than deal with in that aspect, which Ironside Farah will highlight as cumulative. But in terms of looking at the single principle of the non-breaching of the escarpment from the cars, how many pylons do you think we're actually dealing with? Because I don't think Ironside Farah mixed some of the elevated points and the low points. So in terms of trying to nail down the fundamental principle of not breaching the escarpment from the cars, how many pylons are we talking about, and can that be mitigated by the removal, I guess, is my some question.
So by pylons, you mean turbines?
Turbines, sorry.
That is significant because obviously there are a lot of big pylons in the grasslands of Clackmannanshire. So wherever you look from the cast above the skyline of the Ochils, you don't see any turbines, you don't see any hubs, blades, or tips. So that is kind of a singular principle. I think it's binary is a word that's used by Ironside Farah. And then you move into the Oakles, walk up into them. You go there for recreation. You go there to experience the landscape, experience the views. It's a separate but connected impact. So you've got the both of them. And I think the technical landscape report from Ironside Farrar is there to give us what we need as planners. It does go into detail about that sort of thing. But there are some fundamentals here you're looking at. And I think it's right to say that, you know, are you considering where you've got no turbines at all on the Scarp Sky at the moment, whether the principle of introducing them is fundamentally unacceptable. And I think that comes out of the report, it comes out of the reasons for objection, that as far as officers are concerned, having regard to the report, which is a very good one for a report, that is the position we're adopting. Does that answer your question in a brief way?
Not entirely, John. I was just trying to stick to just the principle of reaching of the skyline from the cars. And I think you said there are no turbines then that fall into that. The turbines.
No,
I thought it was 5 from the Ironside Farrar report.
Yeah, you're correct. There's various, as you move around Blackman nationally, you'll be seeing 3, 4 or 5. The Ironside Farrar report recommends removal of up to 6.
Right.
And there is kind of a hierarchy of the worst, moving towards the least worst. And the worst tend to be the ones which are nearer to the Scarp skyline, for example, T1, T2, which are going to be seen from most places. And in particular, ones where you're going to see the hubs over the skyline, because the moving blades of a turbine are one thing, the static hubs and the tops of towers are another thing. You've got the interplay between the two of them, but the hub is a fixed item. You're not seeing it fleetingly or dynamically, you're seeing it in situ. And you will see them not only from some of the places we've seen today, but like I mentioned, in amongst, as you move around Clackmannanshire, if you're heading north towards the hills, if you're heading east or west through the middle of the county, or if you're moving around the settlements in between buildings and vegetation, you will pick up on them. And at the moment, you don't see any. So it's a fundamental. It's a step change, nothing too sudden and significant ability.
Thanks, John. I'm going to bring Pauline in that you wanted to work.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of things. I realise this is a difficult one for members. It's the first section 36 that we've dealt with. And obviously we've undergone training, trying to explain to you so you understand the different situation that the council is not the planning authority, the energy consenting that is the planning authority, but the council is statutory consultees. And in a way you have to assess the application than use any other. And John's presented his report very well, and his report gone through all the material considerations and key issues, and we include the climate emergency, the impact on climate change, the economic development, material planning consideration, and the benefits of the wind farm in terms of construction jobs and so on. But as you know from the training and from John's briefing, one of the most significant local issues for us as a council, for you as an elected members, us as officers for Clackmannanshire to consider are the local landscape and visual impact. And that's why we commissioned Ironside Farrar to do that independent support for the council, because we don't have in-house people, and most councils wouldn't. Even much bigger councillors in Clackmannanshire would have to commission experts. And you've got that report, it's appended to your commission report. I'm sure you've read it, but the report, actually, page 103, it says the reason for their conclusion and the reason for the recommendation before you, that the Oakles form a distinctive and dramatic backdrop to everyday views from the south, and it's hard to believe that the proposed development wouldn't be perceived as a detracting feature by many visual receptors in this area. And then it goes on to say that the special qualities of the landscape area would be significantly affected. So just as John highlighted, I've sat for committees that have approved many wind farms in my time. So I used to work, we had a planning in South Lanarkshire, which is very windy and has a lot of wind farms. this in particular, you know, you weigh everything up and you look at all the balance, our officers view that this is not finally balanced. The impact on landscape and visual impact on locals and their importance in Clackmannanshire and the negative impact that this would potentially have on the locals sends the application in one direction. And so just so you understand that forms a part of the assessment. And we've got any experts to help with that. So I realise it's a difficult one, but just to say, in my long experience of dealing with wind farm, it is quite unusual that it's not finally balanced. Thanks, Chair.
Right, thank you. Anyone else want to ask a question? In that case, I will formally propose for paper. If you can a second. Oh, Councillor Perry. Right, okay. Then I move to debate. Councillor McTaggart.
Thanks, Chair. Totally, as so I would agree with the officer's recommendations. One in particular, I think the point that John made about potentially opening the floodgates for future further development in the locals, should this go ahead, scares me, really scares me, the fact that we would be almost like saying, right, do we like in these locals and we won't hear. The other point I wanted to make was on the news last night, I don't know if anybody else saw about Bentley Bank, where there's going to be 307 offshore turbines and it will produce enough power for 1.6 million homes. So this is a very good idea. This offshore farm, wind farm is happening. Why do they need this wee bit in locals? When they've got massive potential for these offshore ones that are in it. You know, it's off the coast of that. So obviously people from the barrel the surrounding areas might be able to see it, might be visible somewhere. But it certainly won't be across a beautiful skyline like the locals. So, as I say, I completely support the officer recommendations. Thanks, Chair.
Anyone else? Sorry, Chair, I don't know what's the fun of the second in this, quick off that. And actually, Councillor Dagger said it was easy for second, and I am concerned about letting this go through its current form. It does undermine the special licensing area and being to, I think there's reason why it is other than somebody that captures exactly why you objectives at this stage. Also helps to what's the triggers the public and I think that shouldn't close it. It's fine that we get an opportunity to express our in chambers, and I'm not sure that different to the public view, but it gives the opportunity for that to be held. The second one, proposals.
Yeah, I'm happy to second the officer's recommendation. I must admit, I was looking at it from a very simplistic point of view, in that founding principle about not pushing starting at which there's about 5 or 6 turbine that fails that test just before you kick the ball and considering the issue. I think there is a big issue about cumulative impact once you're up in the hill. You saw some of those earlier photomontage issues from Bencliffe and Ebbet. And this target is highlighted. I think Scotland, we're maybe heading to a position where we're getting over provision of wind turbines, keep saying pylons, apologies, wind turbines. And therefore that means that we ought to safeguard our more sort of sensitive areas, and those sensitive areas from Clackmannanshire are the locals. That's not to discount the fact that clearly the developments do offer increased recreational opportunities, and I did like the part of the proposal where the Albert Line path is extended into the locals, and I think there's a lot of opportunities along those lines. But I think the scale of the development is inappropriate for us, and on that first founding principle of reaching starting, I think we ought to absolutely stick to that. Even although I'm not John reported on that when they went to appeal, and I don't know what impact that will have in the eastern area of locals out with our council area, but certainly for me, and approach looking folks in the cast and approaching coming home to Clackmannanshire, and the fact that there aren't any turbines reaching the skyline is always something I think I value, but equally in the Woking Hills, I realise that you're up there for panoramic views and you get some of these turbines. I think this particular application has raised the issue about the cumulative impact, which I think we should be concerned about. Simply test that are required to see that how much it could be mitigated.
Okay, Councillor Cookie.
Really just echoing what other members have said, that arguably the locals are the defining characteristic of the whole county. And in my opinion, anything that's going to breach that as a sort of visual is not acceptable at all. And totally agree with Councillor McTaggart and Councillor Fairley in terms of this will open the floodgates for future developments. So we're potentially looking in 10 or 15 years' time, the entire length of the locals being flooded with these visible turbines and towers, and again that would be completely unacceptable. So in that regard, I absolutely support the officer's recommendation to go ahead.
Thanks. I mean, I agree with the idea of breaking it down, and going from 0 to that number is a big thing. But also many of you, like myself, you drive it back over the Clackmannanshire Bridge, and the view of the vehicles is really quite special. It's at home, it's got that kind of home feeling. I think to have it peppered with fairy fingers on top and being around the movement. So yeah, I'm for it. Sorry. Sorry, Councillor. Oh, okay, I come to the end of my bit here.
don't mind steam turbines, but my issue here would be that, as you said, it could lead to further ones, and my issue would be if there were better turbines, especially the winds. I don't think that would be that great. But we do need to, we are decarbonising, and I know there's and some McTaggart said about the offshore one, but we are decarbonising, so our need for electricity will be higher for heating systems, especially for gas. So you need them units closer. But my issue is, as I say, is that what was said about that it could open it up to other ones, and my issue would be that in the ones that I've got links on, that's where I kind of draw the line as to them.
Okay, I think we're in a position to make a decision on this. We're being asked to raise a planning objection for the reasons stated on the way, which is not too much of it. So the question is, do we wish to raise a planning objection as stated, for reasons stated? Well, if you raise your hand, that means you are raising, you're for raising a planning objection. I'm sure of hands. Unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's the end of the formal part of the meeting. Thank you for your time and trouble. And probably it's going to be today at start. Anything else that might call? If you want to keep the committee back for another discussion, so, public.